Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Classical Odyssey. I'm beyond excited to have you here. I still can't believe that we're meeting. We're seeing each other through the camera. Um, I don't even know whether you need an introduction. Obviously, you don't need an introduction, but you are Sara Frazetta, the granddaughter of Frank Frazetta, and I think everybody in the art communities know who he is. And he means a lot to all of us. And it's so exciting because looking at the Frazetta family, seeing all the pictures that are available on the internet, you seem to look most like your grandpa. So that's amazing. And you're also in charge of Frazetta Girls, which I would like you to talk a little bit about. And yeah, just
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
I will let you take the word.
thank you for having me. You're a breath of fresh air. When we connected, I was like, oh, I like you. Like, we're gonna be friends from afar.
Amazing.
But yeah, I think it's like it's genetics, but it's also like an energy thing. I'm thinking I'm around this Frazetta empire so much that now my characteristics are starting to change a little bit, and I definitely see my grandfather's father. I look a lot like him, so that's an interesting thing. But yeah, Frazetta Girls,
Amazing.
I started it in 2013 with my mom, soon after my grandpa passed away, and all the legal battles were settled,
Mm.
and something that it's something that I was hesitant to do because there was a lot of chaos going on. But when it came down to like matters of the heart, it was for my grandpa. It needed to happen. I felt like it was definitely more of a divine intervention of this is my path, this is my fate, right? Like everything's kind of like written for us, and when you're in that flow state, that life falls into place. So here I am, and it's been a beautiful journey.
It's really amazing. And the first time we had such a lovely talk, the first time we met, we had a brief chat, and I love that you mentioned that it came up almost naturally in our conversation, the underlying theme of honoring your ancestors, and that's such a drive, like an engine in our lives. I have that subliminally in my subconscious all the time because my subject matter is mostly historical, and I constantly think about my national history, my parents, my grandparents, and all these themes from the past. What are the building blocks to our present day and to ourselves, our identity, the many generations before us? So I thought that's really lovely, and that's what drives you as well. You're living, you're breathing, you're eating Frazetta aesthetics and his legacy, and it's really fascinating. Um, and also, I have to mention this from the very beginning. Congratulations on the auction. Um,
Yeah, go
yeah,
grandpa. You would have been
yeah,
really. And I want to go back to what you were saying though about
yeah,
like ancestral, and it's like finally in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people like feel like this in this like generation. For a while I was like, do I go into this family business, or do I go on into my own way? And then I thought about how much we've been like as a society pressured to, not go into a family. I
mhm,
mean, when I think about that, that's crazy, right? Like I have an
yeah,
opportunity with my grandfather and what he did. Like, what
mhm,
will I ever do that's bigger than that? Nothing, like nothing. But that's something to be proud of and say,
mhm,
I am from his bloodline. I will go on and continue on what he did. That's an honor. And I think like, a lot of society has brainwashed us to think like, no, don't work in your family, as even if it's a small
mhm.
shop, right? Don't work in the family business, do something else, go work for a big corporation. And now that's, I think, starting to unravel in society, where we're seeing like, no, this is actually really important. We need to do things where this is like for our bloodlines. And so I'm glad you said that. This is something that like we as like our peers that we need to be talking about and saying this is how we get back to the good stuff and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating because our culture today is so disruptive, and I really love that you pointed that out because everybody seems to encourage you. No, no, you have to. Uh, Everybody is supposed to embody some sort of mini revolution against their,
Yeah,
yeah, um,
crazy, right? Like
yeah, exactly, against their parents, and it's
pass
like
now.
that's a value. It's not a value at all. It's amazing, and it's also such a beautiful thing because your grandpa left such a great legacy. And the reason why I wanted to mention the auction, I'm going to bring it back at the later stage, is because his relevance in today's day and age, and contribution to the pop culture, and how much he influenced so many artists, is also like visible through the. I mean, you set a record at auctions, and I think it was a record in the genre of fantasy in
Yeah.
comic, because that's kind of the genre he's put in. It was Conan the Ape Man. It was sold for $13 million.
$13.5 million.
$13.5 million. That was absolutely fascinating, and especially now that the market for art is kind of going through a small depression,
Mm-hmm.
it just tells you how, yeah, it's
Yeah, well,
fascinating.
I always knew my grandfather, I didn't grow up really thinking about his art ever. Like, I didn't really know anything about his art besides that it was everywhere in his house and it was just part of him and part of our life, right? I didn't think about the famous people that were influenced by him, or what my grandma was selling them for at the time, or how any of the logistics worked. But once I got into the business and I was starting to like advise my family on when to sell the art and what the value was, I saw it and I'm like, no, these are worth a ton. So I urged my family members, my aunts and uncles and my mom, I said, just hold on. I'm like, these paintings are going to go through the roof. Like, this is going to be insane. And I always told my mom, she had really low offers throughout the years. Like, I'll never forget, this art dealer was like, if you don't sell it for $1 million right now, your mom, she's never going to get a bigger price than this. And I just looked at him and I was like, you can't limit Frazetta. Like, his prices will just keep going up and up and up because he hasn't been gone for that many years. And that's just what happens with an artist. And it's what happens, especially with an artist who is so revolutionary and ahead of his time. I mean, people look at the art now and think it's modern, right? Like, they don't think it's from the 60s, the 50s. So I always told my mom she'd get an offer like $1 million and then like $5 million, which is huge, right? But again, it's about really preserving that like true value. And I said, Mom, you will not sell that painting for less than $12 million. I have seen it in my head the entire time, probably from Grandpa, downloading it. And then sure enough, it sold for 13.5 million. And it was, I wasn't shocked. I was like, I knew it. I knew
That's
this thing.
amazing. You
Yeah.
had that vision long before. You
Yeah.
had that number 12. I read on Forbes. I read 2 articles on Forbes, because I think the other record was set by Egyptian princess.
Yes.
Probably did I say the title correctly? Because probably
Egyptian.
yeah,
Egyptian.
Egyptian Queen. Yes, sorry. So I read that article on Forbes. It was really well written. I really enjoyed reading it, and um, I think, because I want to ask you about your childhood with your grandfather and how it was, but I really wanted to point out early on that some of his subject matter is not everybody's cup of tea. I agree, but the way he delivered his artistic maturity is in the line of tradition of the old masters. I mean,
Yes.
that's indisputable. And I'm the more I study Frazetta, the more I'm impressed. It's just genius, because the composition has this really beautiful geometry. Probably he preferred this triangular geometry. It's very monumental. It's always upwards. And his palette is kind of limited, but it's incredibly powerful. And he masters anatomy. It's absolutely fantastic. And what I love so much about Frazetta's work is that a lot of artists copy him and they did not succeed, because I feel like when you try to copy Frazetta, if you don't do 100% job, you're gonna end up in kitsch somehow, because you overcrowd it, and you have too many focal points. But he knew how to create 1 or 2 focal points in the painting, and everything else fades off, so it has this aura of mystery, and it's old master level, like the Renaissance style. I think pre-Raphaelites, they were also like probably an aspiration for artists his generation, but it's absolutely marvelous, especially his pen and ink
Yeah.
work. That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I don't know many artists who are
You,
able to do something like that. Yeah,
yeah, you said it so perfectly. It was all a matter of design, right? Like, so the shape,
exactly.
geometry, that's what came first to him.
Mhm.
And that's like blocking it out and seeing where the eye flows. And he always compared his art to music. He's like, how does it how do you hear it, and how does the composition flow? And so he just, that was natural. And I think that is like a gift people get. And it's so interesting because I was thinking about it. I'm like, I really wish I could find out more about his ancestors. His
Yeah.
father's family from Sicily. His mom was also his mom's dad was from Sicily, and his mom's mother, I believe, was from northern Italy. But mainly, like, just they were Sicilian. So but I don't know anything of like what was passed down to him because there's like such limited like searches for the Sicilians. I don't know why I can't. I can find everything about my grandmother's side with the English ancestors and the Irish, but I can't find anything really. But I'm going to continue to dig. But yeah, for him, it just he was the first of many in his family to just come out and say he like come out more like with not say anything, but have an obsession with the arts. I
Yeah.
mean, 3 years old, he just was obsessive, like drawing and drawing and drawing. And I thought about like I always say that he's got a gift, he's got a talent, but he also had an obsession, and he had an obsession with for many years. And yes, when he got older, when he was doing this as a career in like the 60s and 70s, he got a little bit lazier because then he's doing it as a job, and he has other interests in his life, he has a family and everything else. But his formative years, that's all he did. I mean, he'd go out and play and liked baseball as well, but as a kid, it was like, when he was in grade school, that's how he got into art school, because his teachers noticed that he was obsessive. He wasn't paying attention in school. He was just drawing his classmates, drawing the Easter Bunny, drawing Santa Claus on the chalkboards, and they were like, this kid he's really into art. You have to get him into school. So yeah, I think it's just a passion, and then the passion and obsession meet the talent and like the inherent understanding of composition, and then you get a master like Frank Frazetta.
Yeah, he had all the ingredients. It's a funny expression. It's probably a little bit countercultural. We see that in Romania, and I think it's also common in the Balkans. It's very funny. It doesn't require an explanation. If you have it, you have it. If you don't, you don't. It's either
Simple.
or.
Pretty simple. Yeah.
So he had it, and he was a genius. I really believe that. And I remember I saw a post on Instagram. You were posing with two of his paintings from when he was 10 or 12. I think he was 10 years old.
It's not
something.
confirmed between 10 and 12 years old, and it was his
It's
sailboat and his bear. And when he got
yeah.
into school and he was mentoring under Michel Falange, that's when he really started to elevate. I mean, he was a kid, and he was with his grandma and his family, and they were of course encouraging him, but they had no technical training skills. And then when he got with Michel Falange, who was trained in fine arts, then he was like really starting to elevate. So much of his career is him, but it's also like anything in our lives, all the people on the sidelines that are helping you and guiding you, and putting in just either some criticism that really makes you go, right? Like when he was 14, his art was incredible, but he had I think he was probably like 16. It was Ralph Mayo, and he was working in Standard Comics, and he made a comment to him, and he said, "Frank, you don't know anatomy, right?" And my was, he had been drawing since he was 3 years old at that time, putting in an obsessive amount of work, and then someone calls him out and says, "You don't know anatomy," saying you suck. Like, God.
Hard to imagine though, but
yeah, so he went home, and he gave him the George Bridgman book. He gave him another book I can't recall, but he looked at it, and again, that obsessive like determination in his mind, he was like, I'm going to learn, and he copied the book 2 times through, just went over, traced it, and
because that was the question. I thought I'm going to leave it for later, but I think everybody thinks about that, like how did Frazetta learn anatomy? And you hear like these. Some people talk, but it's mostly like hearsay. He learned it from there, or he said that, but he actually didn't mean it. He lied about it or something like that. But so it was Bridgman's book. He copied it twice.
Yes. And because of Michel Falange, what he was teaching him at the time, right before that, when he went into comics, he was really teaching him speed. So my grandpa he had such like great eye-hand coordination, and he was so athletic, and he was just, like you said, a genius. So he just had that ability to like register quickly. So when he went home and did twice through. Like, okay, I'm gonna trace it, then I'm gonna copy it through. Then he brought it back to Ralph, and he was like, I learned anatomy, and Ralph was, of course, like, oh, you did. He's like, I've been in, I've been doing this for years, and he's like, I still don't know anatomy. So he was always very eager to be just better, right? And that's like throughout his whole career, he just kept using any kind of criticism or anything. Like, even he just, even with his like repaints, right, you can see that in his obsessive behavior to always want better. He wanted to have the best possible case scenario with his art. And yeah, again, it's how you become a master.
It seems so far that he did everything right,
Yeah.
because it's obviously you never achieve anything alone in life. I mean, when people say I made it, on my own, it's not really true. It's a lot of circumstances that you don't choose. You don't choose where you're born, when you're born. You don't choose your genetic makeup and the people that come in your life, because everything that you experience, the sum of your life experiences, it shapes you into who you are, your core identity as an artist, or as a person in the professions. There's all these factors that define who Frazetta was, and I think, as I wanted to ask you, like, but you kind of covered that up a little bit. But since his early childhood, I think people notice how talented he was. I feel like he continued to have that childish in a good way, like childlike part of him. He preserved that really well, because I feel like he was kind of a kid who's always excited about adventure books.
Yeah.
Um, but also, like, when I saw some interviews with him, he had this like Dean Martin-esque persona with the suit, wear tuxedo, and very charming and very elegant, obviously very handsome man. And he was his own model. I'm very sure for many paintings you can see that.
Oh, yeah, so many of them. Like, there he is again. There's
Yeah,
Frank.
exactly. But I think literature like played a huge role, adventure literature specifically. And you have your Frazetta Fridays, your
Hmm.
podcast, which is really amazing, and I really recommend everybody watching to check that, because you cover everything in length. And I think you had two parts on Edgar Rice Burroughs,
Yes.
because a lot of Frazetta's work is about Tarzan. Um,
Dream come true for him, because that's what he grew up on, right? He
yeah,
grew up Hal Foster's Tarzan, and to be able to, I mean, it is interesting though, and I do cover it in the interview, in the Frazetta Fridays, but he had to try out. He was working for Al Cap, and he was kind of like a superstar, right? A ghost, but yet he was revered by Al Cap, who was just doing incredible numbers at the time, very famous. And then after that, he was Donald Wollheim, who was the editor at Ace. He was working a lot with Roy Krenkel, and Roy Krenkel is another mentor of my grandfather's, probably the biggest mentor of his. And so he was working with Wollheim at the time, and Wollheim saw some of my grandpa's art, and because of Krenkel, and Wollheim was still like, I don't know if Frazetta could draw Tarzan. So he had to try out and give this spec piece of Tarzan and the Ant-Men. And even then, Wollheim was still kind of like, all right, we'll give him a shot. But he wasn't thrilled. He wasn't like, oh my God, I'm so blown away, this Frazetta guy. So it's like, again, like you said, the circumstances falling in line of having someone like Roy Krenkel really advocating for him and saying, like, no, like, trust me, like, Frazetta is going to be a huge name. Like, you have to hire him. So yeah, it's definitely, our journeys are never alone, and everything is, I believe, fate. And I think my grandpa believed that too. And he just he wasn't like uh, he was very articulate, but he wasn't a man of many words of going into things. He kind of let his art speak for itself, of like who he was. He didn't do like a ton of interviews or anything, which is unfortunate. I'm always like, I wish he did more interviews, but he wasn't interested. He was so cool.
what was he like? I mean, from what I understand, he was rather private. It seems like he had a really good work-life balance. He was very obsessive while working, but then he would seem to take um, quite a distance from his work. Like he would have this detachment that many professional artists that I know they don't, and sometimes that builds a lot of frustration, because sometimes you tend to overwork and you don't
Hmm.
have that distance from your work, and it doesn't allow you to look at yourself objectively. But I feel like even that your grandfather did really well. He had that. He was almost, because from watching your videos, he was almost like an elastic, like super
Yeah,
intense, long distance, and then snap, creating another work of art.
it's so true. And I mean, that was more of a luxury as he got more
Yeah,
famous, right?
yeah,
You know, is what he was trying to feed
yeah.
his
You have
family.
to work your way to
Yeah,
that point.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you have to think like when he did his famous funnies pieces, which were like his most incredible wash inks, like
Hmm.
just blown away. He was already professionally inking for 10 years. So, in that
Hmm.
period of life when he was working for Standard and Bailey and doing like a snowman comic and, all these for what just tons of comics, Ghost Rider, he was working a lot, but he was fast, so he did get a lot of in between time of like going and playing baseball and having that work life balance. Yeah, he was really fast, which helped that. I think not everyone has the luxury of being so fast where they can get the job done and then go and do whatever they want. But later on, after he had established himself, after he did the Conan works, after he was, just being hailed the king of fantasy, then he was able to say, nah, I don't want to do that job. Right. So he was able to just have that luxury to say, I'm not feeling it. Of course, my grandma was the money manager, so she was always pushing him to do more. That was the thing she always said throughout his life was he's lazy. And he'd look at her and of course they would bicker and it was funny, but he's
Hmm.
like lazy. And like, for instance, he'd have all his art in his studio, the originals, and he'd be like, what do you mean I'm lazy? But in my grandma's defense, he was so fast that he could have done another 1,000 paintings in his life. And really, for my grandma, she was a businesswoman, so she's thinking money. Like, Frank, like, he could have made the family so rich, just sit down and crank them out. But he was selective in, like, I think it was a balance of like, he wanted to go out and he wanted to play baseball and live his life, but he also just had to feel it. He had to have, like you said, the elastic band where he was just feeling, okay, it's time to, and we all have our own methods, right? When we have to produce, and that was him. He couldn't force it. It just had to be a natural. And he always said, like, in his interviews, when he did his one interview in the tux that you were referring to, he's like, I don't know where I get it, maybe from another life. It's just in my head and
Yeah.
I get it out. But again, it's like, I say that, and then there's the mix of things. I just recently learned, Roy Krenkel, when I was talking about the Tarzan and the Ant-Man, the tryout painting, Krenkel did that whole composition for him. He did the rough work. So there was this behind the scenes guy, Roy Krenkel, who's doing not a lot of rough works for Grandpa, but I would say at least 10 of them for one of his most famous paintings, which is pretty significant.
I remember you mentioned about, if I remember correctly, because I've tried to watch quite a few videos from you. It was, I hope I remember it correctly, because it was a very interesting dynamic between Roy Krenkel and your Frank Frazetta.
Hmm.
Because in the beginning, I think that Frank, he learned a lot in terms of oil painting and also anatomy from Krenkel. And
Hmm.
then kind of this dynamic reversed, because Krenkel said that, no, he's better than me at anatomy. He's way better than me at even oil painting. So
Oh,
it's amazing. He was like a sponge. Everything that he experienced, he kind of used it. He managed to use it very naturally, and sometimes subconsciously, I think, to his art. And
yeah, Roy's hang up with himself. He was a very humble guy, like,
Mhm,
fault, where he just didn't think he was good at all, which is crazy because if Roy wasn't good or great, my grandpa wouldn't have respected him. I mean, my grandpa knew my grandpa didn't listen to many people. He would be like, "What do they know? They don't paint as well as me or ink as well as me. I'm not going to listen to them." But Roy, he always listened to because he really, really knew. Roy knew what he was talking about. But Roy was very slow, so it would take him a long time. He was very indecisive. He doubted himself, so
mhm,
he didn't do much. But I think Roy's purpose on this earth, aside from doing iconic covers for Edgar Rice Burroughs, he was supposed to be a mentor. He was supposed to be a teacher. He was like one of those people that is just so selfless. And it's like all about just giving my grandfather, because my grandpa wasn't he didn't read really. He didn't like research. Roy was that person. He would come to him and give him like books about like just like Norman Lindsay, like anyone that
mhm,
just the old masters, Caravaggio, like he would talk about the artists that my grandpa needed to know about. Joseph Clement Cole, like just I could go on, but it was Roy that was to thank for showing my grandpa the greats that came before him and then his contemporaries and saying, look, like these are the guys you need to be like. And again, that really motivated my grandpa because he's like, well, yeah, I have to be one of those guys that the other artists will say, this is the guy you need to reference. Like he wanted to be the reference point. So you have to have those people in your life that are always like kind of poking you and saying, better, do a little better. So it's a beautiful thing. But with the styles, it was specifically Roy's girls. So Roy always liked women who he said he didn't look at a woman who was under 200 pounds. It was just not his thing.
Okay.
He liked thick. So he was really into the thick girls. And my grandpa would always make fun of him because my grandpa's taste was more athletic, like more like my grandpa, you know. And eventually Roy's girls started getting smaller and smaller over time. And then my grandpa's girls ended up getting thicker and thicker.
So they counterbalance each other all the time in all the details possible. Fascinating.
Yeah. Like energetically, they like kind of started like
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, that's really funny. I mean, Frazetta Girls, obviously, I mean, he was such a designer. You said that from the beginning, and I think that's like a huge word. He was a great designer.
Yeah.
But I like the Frazetta Girls. I mean, obviously they have the really round rear, but they really look really strong. They're very strong. You know, all his characters look like they could easily break your neck, you know, with their fingers. So it's fascinating. Sorry?
Yeah. Or their thighs.
Yeah, exactly. It's very original as well. You know, that aesthetic is also timeless, but very original. I never thought that the inspiration was from the source. But I just don't want to have this question lost because there's a lot of curiosity from me and also from some of my friends. You spend a lot of time with your grandpa, and I'm sure you witness him working, and you know a lot because you study his life and his work so much. What were his habits? How did he paint? Did he use models all the time? Did he rely like 50-50 more on memory? Because some of his paintings are so incredibly dynamic. They're so convincing, anatomically speaking, and the gesture is so convincing. Yet it's almost impossible that you do that pose yourself. Like John Carter from Mars, he has some giant leaps. You know, like you can't really take a picture of somebody doing that or yourself. Yet it looks so incredibly convincing, and the foreshortening, the perspective is spot on. Some of his early work, I think you also talked about it a little bit. You could see that his foreshortening, he had some issues there. Like the arms look way too short. I think some of his early Conan work as well. But yeah, he made it work so well because the way he designed the whole composition and the character, it was very consistent and coherent with itself. So he was so good, he could cover up even some anatomical problems. But later on, it was just, how did he do it?
He just, I mean, it was never about perfection. It was never like when people would say, oh, where does that lighting source come from? Or, oh, that doesn't make sense. Or, oh, where is Ghoul Queen's leg, right? Like there's so many things that if you look at it, there are missing things, but that's intentional because the design came first. And he said, if this leg is there, well, then your eye is going to go to it and your eye is not going to go to the focal point of which I want it to go to. So he wasn't, people, critics still to this day, but a lot of critics when he was in his height, because of course he was peak fame, everyone's talking about him, he's on Esquire, American artist, and the whole world's like going Frank Frazetta, and people would point that out and he would just be like, what, you're missing the point of art. Like that's not the point of perfection. If I'm trying to make something exact, then I'll go take a picture of it. But he really didn't use live models like ever. I would think he himself was his own model. He was taking selfies. He kept a mirror of himself by his easel. He referenced my grandma from time to time, only if it was like a really odd pose. Like there's one Battlestar Galactica painting where the girl is like posing and it's an awkward pose. And I found the photo of my grandma many years later, and I'm like, there's the exact pose. She was used for it. So but he would get very offended if someone suggested that was happening all the time. He was like, no, he's like, it's in my head. So in his defense, he had a photographic memory. He was a genius, so he could refer things. Like I think he loved movies, and the more I watched the movies that he loved, like the old horror movies and just like Fantasia and like the westerns and just
Yeah.
all the right from the 1940s and 1950s, like that, those were his eras. There's a lot of women that I could see the faces, like you see the inspiration. Robert Mitchum, Night of the Hunter, Robert Mitchum in any Robert Mitchum movie, like that was
Yeah,
his.
exactly. Never thought
That,
about it, but now that you say it, it's quite obvious.
yeah, it's very, and he
Yeah.
loved him. Like that was his, that was his guy. Like that was his. He just was like, this guy is, and he is. And like when you watch his
Mhm.
performance, The Night of the Hunter, it's insane. It's so ahead of its time, where it's he knew what was great, and I think he just like, again, is like more of like a subconscious pulled from that. He kept it in the memory bank, and then so when people would say like, oh, did you get it from this? Like he'd say, no, it just came in my head. But it's like anything that we see or read, we all are downloading it, and then with, like, for instance, like if I'm writing a story, and then I'm like, this is an original idea, I just came up with this, and then it's like, oh, actually this part was kind of inspired by my love of like Mad Max or whatever. Like, but I forget, you forget, like you're watching things and it's years
Yeah.
from before. So yeah, he knew he was very good looking. He didn't really need a lot of references outside of himself. And he could, even with poses with himself, aside from my grandpa was so athletic, he could get in like the craziest poses. And I think like also knowing like how to
Mhm.
use his own muscles, right? For
Yeah,
reference points of like tension, like Michelangelo, like how he wanted the tension always like with the little deep
exactly.
arms. My grandpa could do that because he was so in his own body that he was able to just say, okay, how look down. All right, how's the muscle moving? He could just move it and contort his body.
Mhm.
I mean, gosh, he could have probably been like a gymnast when I see the things he did. Like he was very athletic. So I think that all translates into who you are, will always translate into your art. And that's like why I think it's so important to be really do what you know, right? Like whether it's
Mhm.
drawing or writing or filming or whatever you're doing creatively, tell your story. That's, you don't look outwards. So my grandpa, he was always, he lived his own life. He was like,
Mhm.
he was a homebody. He didn't get into the, like, everyone's into politics now. He was not into politics. My grandma and grandpa didn't vote. They said it didn't matter. And I think they're right. It's like, you know what? I think they were onto
Yeah,
something. Um,
amazing.
and I think they just lived their life, which again, I hope now we start going back to that, where
Yeah.
it's to focus on like his family, his existence, what he can do. And he had like horse blinders on. And I didn't get to experience him painting masterpieces because I was born in 1988.
Mhm.
So while he was still working like for his Writers of the Future paintings like Dream Flight, Space Encounter, which were all
Mhm.
incredible, I was 1 years old when those were happening. I did find old pictures, and it's funny because I would go to like different award ceremonies with him because I was the first grandchild, so I was kind of like their child. But by the time I could, I guess, remember him painting, I was like 8 years old, and he had his first stroke in 1995, 1996, I believe. Actually, it was
Mhm.
1996, and yeah, he lost the ability with his right hand. He had to relearn to draw with his left hand, and he was still good considering, right? Like you have to learn it with your other hand, but it wasn't this. So, but he was still, even with his left hand, he always had an easel in his studio. He was always touching up the one Reign of Wizardry, that painting with the demon and the orgy going on around it, and that was in the studio with all the grandkids. And he didn't. So like to us, we're like, oh, this, it just is, right? Like we were never like
Mhm.
offended by the nudity or the sexual content or demon content. We were just like, this is just grandpa.
You're so used to it, you don't really see it
Yeah.
like that. You're a kid,
And
you kinda
Yeah, you just it's your nurturing home and this is your conditions and this is just what you know. That's how we are as humans. We're very adaptable. So yeah, he always was what I do remember is he was never satisfied. Like I mean, if he had the chance, he would have gone into the museum and taken more off the wall and started touching them up or repainting. And my grandma was like, she had a good sense about her. She's like, you're not allowed in the museum unattended because you're not pulling the masterpieces off the wall and redoing them with your left hand. Absolutely not. But he was stubborn. He tried, and they fought a lot about it. And there's even a part in the documentary where he goes, she doesn't even give me a key to my own museum. And she's like, you don't get the key, Frank. So, they.
What a character she was, your grandma. I mean, a little bit back to what you said. I was so curious about. I'm pretty sure everybody who looks, especially at his pen and ink works, because that's kind of it's the raw work. Like when you do drawing, not painting, you actually see how good you are, because you see the actual construction. You see your calligraphic hand, and it's so mind blowing, the anatomical knowledge and the intellectual power actually to manipulate anatomy however you want. And I listened to podcasts where people said, yeah, he learned from this. He said that he learned from Richmond, but I'm sure he lied. He liked to brag about things. But now when you talk about your grandpa's life and people learn about how he actually was, how obsessive he was with the craft. And some people are very good with algebra, some people are very good at geometry. They have this spatial understanding of objects and things in the world. Not everybody has that. It's a talent. And your grandpa had that power of understanding how shape looks in space, for the human eye. He can manipulate that. He had a very good geometric understanding of the world. So that was a special thing. And I think, yeah, he could do that with some ease. But I think this needs to be reiterated and re-emphasized. Like he struggled a lot with his health. I think the last decade of his life, and the fact that he couldn't use his right hand. I don't know, for an artist, it's almost like a death sentence. You can succumb into a depression and you could never really recover from it. But the fact that he had that determination to at least try, and he was not bad at it at all, using his left hand, this is absolutely incredible. It's a force of life.
Yeah, it's like the artist. I love Carl Kapinski. He recently, I'm sure you saw, he had a stroke,
Yeah.
and been going on live and relearning to draw with his other hand until he gets the strength back. And Carl, I really admire him. Like, he is going through the physical therapy, right? Like, he is determined. My grandpa at the end, when he had his first stroke, he was pretty determined, but it was like after, I think he had 6 to 8 strokes total.
It's unbelievable.
It was just, it got to be too much, where he was like, all right, I'm kind of, he got to the depressed point eventually of, I'm not going to try as much anymore. But he really fought up until the last couple of years of his life. But he had health problems before that too. He had this Graves' disease, the hyperthyroid, and that went undiagnosed for many years. Me and you talked about it. He went from 180 pounds down to like 125 pounds. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with him. They threw him in a mental institute for a little while. I mean, and then they finally were like, oh, sorry, you have hyperthyroid. We have to remove your thyroid. We'll put you on Synthroid. And then everything was back. But, with autoimmune, he was going through a very similar thing. Yeah, he had his body kind of working, but his brain wasn't working. And he said that was the scariest point in his life, where he just had nothing. Like, there was no creativity flowing through him. He would sit down and this was like 5 years, I believe, this period of not being diagnosed correctly. And he said that was the most. He was 56 years old, so pretty young. And he just said nothing. He just would try to paint nothing. So that was, I think, even worse in his life than his strokes when he was older, because if you don't have this, what's the point of having anything?
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think it's very hard to to explain to a lot of people who don't actually experience this, but an autoimmune disease has so many symptoms that are common to all patients, and some of them they're also very individual because it depends how your body reacts to it and your tendencies, proclivities, your genetic makeup, and so on. But thyroid problems are horrible because they do affect your brain in ways that and it's, yeah, with autoimmune disease, something that we talked about it because I experienced this, and that's part of my obsessive pursuit of art. Because if I didn't have that experience, probably I would never be as obsessive about the things I do, in the sense that it's not like this is the only thing that matters to me, not at all. But it's almost like this is my last chance to do it kind of mentality, which I'm fine now because I'm not. But it's very difficult to explain to someone who never experienced this. But the mental state that you're in when your brain doesn't really work well, it's it's indescribable. It's almost like a death, and you're seeing your own death somehow. You're witnessing it, and you can't do anything about it. But he bounced back, and it's incredible because it was a time where, as you said, he was misdiagnosed, and it's something that most people can't relate to, and it's also something very unusual for you because you don't know like what's happening with you. You don't have any system of reference, and that's really scary because mostly the unknown.
Yeah.
So that's really
I don't know how he really got through it because like, you know, like you, I also same thing. Like I
mhm,
experienced my 20s, I was very unhealthy, just
mhm,
endocrine things, the thyroid, hypothyroid. So I don't have the eye thing like poor grandpa, but I have the opposite where I'm just like exhausted, hair falling out, like I can't function. And
mhm.
then you know, when you pop out of it, you feel like you said this urgency of like, oh no, like not I don't want to jinx it, but like I hope this doesn't come back. I have to
Yeah,
execute while I feel good because you just don't know when. So I think when he like when he did say it, he said it in an interview. He's like when it came back, I was like, oh my god, and he started creating with urgency because yeah, you take it for granted, like you take feeling good for granted, and then when it what a blessing though when it comes back, like you know just with anything
exactly.
like I think more people, sadly, it's they are feeling it now. And I think about you know Grandpa being back then without the internet. Like if I didn't have the internet to reference or like people to talk to, it's like you'd really feel like you're going insane. And I think that's what
Exactly.
drove him into the mental institute because he just he couldn't go on Chat GPT or like you know Reddit.
No,
Maybe it was better not knowing. I've gone down some dark rabbit holes. I'm like, okay, and I've diagnosed myself with like 19 different things. And I'm like, no, I didn't have
yeah.
any of it.
Yeah, it's true because it's you're navigating, yeah, through the complete unknown. It's unexplored territory.
Yeah.
Um, but everything. I had a friend who called me once. I was going through a bad period health wise, and I will never forget what he said on the phone. He said like this river has been crossed before, and it meant so much to me at that time because you tend to forget that no matter what you're experiencing right now, it's part of the universal human experience. So something
Yeah.
similar or identical has been experienced by someone, maybe not in this generation, but before you. So
Oh,
you're never alone in anything that you experience or feel or struggle with. Um, and just that thought alone, it's quite encouraging. So that's absolutely fascinating about his person. He was an incredibly like muscular person emotionally and intellectually, not just physically. He was really tough, and yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And also, just to jump to a lighter subject, he also said that he used very cheap tools and oils. He never really cared much about that part.
no, he was really cheap. I mean, he grew up in the Great Depression. So, like, you know, when they didn't have paper, he was using like his parents' books to draw on. So that was just kind of like what he was used to. So I think he just he wasn't rich like his whole life. Like, sure, he went through periods where when he was doing the movie posters, he was making quite good money for that
Mhm.
time period. But there would be times where there would be, you know, not much coming in, or they'd have to pull back a little bit. So that kind of just stuck with him, that frugal mindset from being in the Great Depression. His parents being, just they're hardworking. His father was a stone setter, so he was just like a blue collar worker, and his mother was just a homemaker. So just humble beginnings kind of stuck with him his entire life. Because I don't think he wasn't like trying to make any point, like, oh, you can do it with any kind of materials, even the cheapest. It wasn't about that. It was genuinely just he didn't want to spend the money.
Yeah,
he didn't
the frugal mindset.
anything with. I mean, it's not about the materials, right? Like when I first started drawing, I'm like, I have to have the best ink and this, and that didn't do anything. That didn't help me at all.
No, it's fascinating. Sometimes it does help. You want to have something good quality because the pigments, they show off differently. But it's also, I thought this is really great because his art survived despite the cheap material. So your
Only thing
art and whatever you're creating, sorry?
The Mickey Mouse watercolors aren't surviving very well, though.
Okay.
I
I'm
agree with
sorry to hear that.
materials with longevity of like, are you going to see this in 100 years? So some of the personal watercolors he did for me are, it's like Back to the Future, the movie, like they're slowly disappearing. That's what's in the photo. That's what's happening. Future. Do you remember the part where it's Marty and his brother and sister are starting to like disappear? Like, and he's like,
yeah. So I'm sorry, 'cause I heard you with an interruption, I think, and I kind of thought that it was a poster that you were talking about. And
no, I know. I think that. God, who did that movie poster? That wasn't Drew Struzan, was it? He just
I think
passed away.
he was. Yeah. I think it was him because I was
genius. He was another genius. Looking at his body of work, that he did that movie poster for Hook. Remember the movie with Robin Williams? It's like one of the best movie posters ever. Like the composition of that, it's like
he was phenomenal.
But yeah, no. But my grandpa's paintings are doing the disappearing effect. Some of the Why, Grandpa? Why
it's terrible?
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, it is. But I remember you said. I'm sorry.
That you laugh or cry in life.
Yeah, it's both at the same time. It's never pure happiness. It's never pure sadness. I mean, it is pure sadness exists. Pure happiness doesn't exist because with happiness comes I think, realization that it's not lasting.
Yeah.
So it's it's bittersweet as everything in life. It was one Tarzan at the Earth score. I think he baked it and he destroyed it, but I think somebody bought it and managed to put it together, so it still exists.
I don't know if it still exists. That's a good question.
Okay. Maybe I had the wrong information.
No, I think it does. The Neanderthals, he baked that one as well. So he was baking his art because that was the time in his life where he had the luxury of procrastinating, and he'd wait to the last minute when he said inspiration would strike, and then he needed to dry it. And there were a bunch of paintings that Warren said that my grandpa would bring in, and he'd be like, it's still wet, be careful with it. So little quirk of Frazetta.
Yeah, that's a problem with oils. I mean, I think it really helps if you live in a hot and dry climate. It goes really fast. You just put it outside in the sun and it's done. But if it's slightly humid, I imagine, especially if you have commissions and you have to do it fast, I think you have to try extreme things.
Yeah, I think he was when Pennsylvania. It's pretty humid. But now that I'm thinking about it, that Tarzan at the Earth core, I think he did ruin it. I think he had to repaint it. I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
I remember reading that he repainted it, but the original one was bought by someone and he put it together.
Yeah, I think that covered that in the Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Everything, I think most of the things that I'm referencing, I listened to from Frazetta Fridays, which is your podcast that I encourage everybody to listen to because they're encyclopedic regarding your grandfather's work. I also wanted to ask you about, so there's a Frazetta museum, or are there two Frazetta museums? Because you get different results on Google. I think it's Pennsylvania and then it's Boca Grande in Florida. So if people want to see your grandfather's work in original, how can they have access to it?
Yeah, so what we're doing, my mom was gracious enough to open the museum in Florida for a couple years. Of course, we opened right when COVID hit, so that really let all the steam out. We were like, oh, great, what good timing. But then we reopened again in 2022, 2023, 2024. This year we did not open in the month. We usually just open for the month of February, because like it's, my mom's collection. It's very inconvenient. You have to insure it and bring it all to the island, which is like a little scary. It's the value of the art. But this year we did not open because Hurricanes Debbie, Milton, and Helene put 6 feet of water in the building and destroyed it. So they've been renovating that. They're still working on the renovations to this day.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It's part of living in Florida. We're getting used to it. But so that was great. But what we're doing in the interim now of that, like and it's kind of to be determined if she'll open next February, because there's things moving and shifting in her life. But what we are going to be doing, and this is what we've been doing like since I started Frazetta Girls, is working with other collectors and then doing exhibits with their collections. So my friend Ken, who is a great, like, just incredible guy. He owns a lot of my grandfather's originals, like Winter of the Coup. He has a Devil Rider. He has the Dina, the space, like chemical plant watercolor that's unbelievable. He has all these inks and watercolors. And so he's going to bring his whole collection here to my new studio. And we're going to have a pop-up show in November. So we're probably going to start doing these quarterly. Ken is like the first collector I've been working with to do like more exclusive shows. We did one in DeLand in February, which is in Florida. We did one in Orlando two years before that, at this little restaurant, and a lot of people showed up for it. And now now that I have my studio space, I'll be able to curate it and do this like great experience, because I want more art experiences in our area that we're in Sarasota, Florida. So that's what we're doing. We have another huge thing that we're working on right now that I can't announce yet, but it will be like with other collectors coming together, moving more around the United States, like hopefully eventually to Europe, planting these seeds, because it's like, my grandfather's art has been sold like for many, many years. So like a painting like Ghoul Queen, how I mentioned earlier, Ghoul Queen's one of my favorite paintings. I've never seen it in person before because they sold it back in the 70s. And I do now know who owns it. It's a private collector, and I'm hoping I get to see it soon and maybe go photograph it. But just to have the opportunity to be able to like start putting these feelers out and saying, how can we come together and show the world these original works? It's really incredible, because a lot of these paintings haven't been seen in so long. And I think more collectors, not only do they know it keeps the value high of the artwork by doing this, they know it's just important for people to see, like artists like yourself, to see the originals and how impactful that is. It's like you just can't capture it, like seeing a reproduction in any like it's truly again, it's an energy thing beyond seeing like the ink and the wash and the oils and you have to energetically connect to it. And there is the Pennsylvania Museum is still open and ran by Frank Jr. and his children. They have, I believe, like 30 originals in there, because the remaining art in the family before my grandpa passed away was split among his children. I actually was like 21 years old, splitting all of that art up and trying to find, a balance and kind of mediate the whole situation. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was just like, well, if it helps the family. My whole heart in the beginning was, as a family, let's all come together, right? Like, because it's very important for grandpa, but sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to. But in life, you have to be adaptable and say, okay, well, that didn't work. But now what a beautiful thing that's like happening is these collectors and people, couple historians, they've come into my life and been more like family than my own family, and more willing to work and show the art than my own family. And that's like a beautiful thing. So sometimes you have to keep that faith and know that your intention is there, and then it comes to you in unexpected ways. So that's
brilliant.
George Lucas, his museum will be in Los Angeles, opening in 2026.
That's brilliant.
And I think he has 12 Frazetta oils, and I think his collection continues to grow. So I can't like say exactly which ones yet that are newly in his collection, but he's got a lot. He's got a lot of beautiful ones. Again, like New World. I've never seen that one in person. I can't wait to see it. Like, so just you see when I see them, like Dina, what I was mentioning earlier, there's like these greens that are like they even in like the old prints that my grandma did, the reproductions, they're very washed out. So it just makes it look like a totally different painting. And then when you see it in person, you're like, oh my God, the vibrance of his colors are incredible.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to go there. And then I encourage everyone to LA, it's easy to get to LA, and there's a lot of accommodations. So when his museum opens, I mean, he has so many artists in there.
Frank's influence on the pop culture and big movie producers and the aesthetics in the big movies that you recognize, probably a lot of people don't even think, oh, this was actually a lot taken from Frazetta's aesthetics there. We need a second episode. I mean, I might be as bold as to ask, maybe whenever you have time, we could do an episode just about that, because it's so much that would be amazing. And you're doing absolutely brilliant work. I mean, you have this really intuitive intelligence, and you knew from the very beginning, like, your grandfather's worth in terms of his art, what he left behind. And it's really phenomenal. It's what we started talking about in the beginning, honoring your ancestors. There's so much work to be done just in archiving what they left behind, because I think it was very little that he actually was able to keep. I think early commissions, he was also bound by the contract to give them away, and he had no control over his work. So it's actually amazing that history does have the censorship, but also is very generous in preserving what's valuable. So it's people like you that really facilitate this, and I mean, it's amazing. And yeah, we're very grateful for you, very much. And I know there's going to be a lot of art students who are gonna watch this interview, and they're gonna find a lot of really inspiring things and very useful pieces of advice. But I wanted to finish by asking you something. Is there anything that you wanted to be asked during an interview about your grandfather, and you never got the opportunity to talk about, but you would like to share with people?
That's a great question, but the honest answer is I feel like I've talked so much that I've probably covered most of it. I like my grandpa. When we both get to chatting and really chatting, it just doesn't stop. So I don't, maybe we'll save that. I'm going to really think about it. And then the second episode we do, I'll
Yes,
ask.
we're gonna do
Yeah.
a second episode, and I want it to be a little bit more technical. We're gonna showcase some of his work, and we're gonna talk a little bit about
Yeah,
um,
show light and dark, the use of that is like
yeah.
incredible. But I think what I'll leave, because it's going to be the students listening, is I'll leave it with what Frank said. He said, just be you. He's like, he always said this, it doesn't have to be perfect, just be you. If it's you, I'm going to love it. And then he also said, just keep drawing, just keep doing it. So like the advice is be obsessive. Like if it's really what you want to do, then do it. Do it every day.
Amazing. Run your own track.